A few years ago, I realized that trying to find the best stories in cricket was impossible for any fan. I even tried to get funding to make my own cricket Huffington Post. It never quite worked. But luckily, we finally have someone filling this massive void in our game. Best of Cricket. They scour the publications everywhere to find, quite simply, all the best news and the greatest stories on our sport. Then they make it just as easy. They either email it or WhatsApp it direct to you. Cricket's greatest tales delivered to your device. This is truly the best of cricket. Name and job title, please.
So my name is Phil Jaques from Phil Jaques Pro Cricket Academy here in Australia in Cronulla, New South Wales.
I've got you on because you did an interview with cricket.com the other day, and you were talking about how no one is making runs in Sheffield Shield cricket anymore. You've obviously been a player in Sheffield Shield cricket and a coach and everything else. When did you first start noticing that the runs were sort of drying up?
Well, firstly, I don't think there's nobody making runs. I think it's definitely there are definitely runs being scored.
Not as many. Not as many.
Not as many runs. Probably not having those proficient. The years that 1,000+ seasons and that I guess we were accustomed to in Australia, where there was always 2 or 3 players that were sort of knocking on the door of 1,000 runs. And we're still having some decent seasons, but getting those consistent performances and averaging 60+ in Sheffield Shield cricket is definitely a harder task these days. And I think it's probably been a bit of a trend, I reckon, the last 4 years, 5 years. There was a few things, I reckon, there's a few factors at play here. And I think, one, there's a lot of states that are after results. They're after result wickets. They want wickets that are going to be produce wins for the team. Mm-hmm. There's also 2020 cricket, which is encouraging aggressive play, and a lot more shots being played potentially on the up. All right. In the past, I reckon there was a little bit more conservative with their approach to batting, and a little bit more willing to ride a tough period out. Now it's, if there's something in the wicket and it's moving around, the default is to take the game on and and try and score as many runs as they can before there's a ball with their name on it. In the past, it would be, right, let's try and get through an hour, get up the other end, rotate the strike for a little bit, and the wicket might change and get a little bit better for us, and then all of a sudden we can play and bat on a flutter wicket.
Yeah.
So a few things, a little bit of a perfect storm. You got wickets that are a bit more spicy. You got 2020 cricket. There's a willingness to not bat that time, and this is not every player, but there's a lot of players that are more about trying to take the game on and hit their way through it. And that 2020 cricket also lends the technique probably not being as solid as it was in the past, and not as big a focus either.
Mm. So just look at the stats. So 2002-3, actually 3-4, sorry. The top 6 in Shield cricket averaged 43. The next 5 years after that, they all averaged over 36. Last year, the average of top 6 Shield cricketers was 29. The year before that, it was also 29. So you can see that, it's not a small drop. And as you said, you mentioned a few things. We'll get to some of those. One of the other things that you mentioned, and I think it's starting to become common knowledge now, but it wasn't a huge thing when it happened, is that kookaburra, I can't even get my words out. Kookaburra changed the ball, right? They put more lacquer on it. They reinforced the seam, and they made it a slightly more stronger seam. They were trying to imitate the Jaques ball, which was seen as a more entertaining cricket ball. That happens in 2021. You basically, the next season is when we start to see all the drop-offs in the runs. And I mean, consistent drop-offs. We had some up and down seasons before then, but it's consistent afterwards. Are the cricketers telling you that this ball is just moving more in Australia than it has before?
Yeah, see, I reckon there's a little bit more seam. I don't think it swings a heap, honestly. I think it probably swings the same up front. But it definitely moves more, whether that's the pitch or whether that's the ball. I'm not sure. I personally don't think it's a huge difference with the seam. There's definitely more lacquer on it. And the one thing that I saw was when the wickets were flat, the ball didn't reverse because of the extra lacquer on it. So what we're tending to see is state cricket and first class cricket teams putting more in the wicket because they know that ball will not reverse. It will, once it's flat, it is flat. It is hard to get a wicket on. So I reckon there's a little bit of a perfect storm there. That you've got potentially techniques aren't as good. You got wickets that are a little bit more spicy because they're worried about the fact that when it does get flat, they want to be a long way through the game. And maybe a slightly different, slightly bigger seam, but certainly not like a Duke ball. It's certainly not swing for 50 overs like the Duke's balls do. And I don't think that they move as much as a Duke ball off the wicket either. But there is definitely probably more movement than what we've seen where that kookaburra turf ball was quite a flat seam back in the day. But it would scuff up and it would get like with an abrasive wicket, it would reverse swing. Whereas now, no matter how abrasive that wicket is, I haven't seen the ball reverse since the new balls have come in.
Yeah, I think that's a big difference. Also with the seam, it's not that the seam's more pronounced, it's that it just stays a little bit firmer for longer because of the reinforced nature, I assume. So you can hit it for longer. Also, traditionally, you would have had seam bowlers coming in and trying to hit the seam every ball. Now with the wobble ball, you're not hitting the seam every ball, so the seam isn't getting flattened the way it would have in old days. How much I've talked to a lot of batting coaches over the last couple of years, and they say, at first they were very skeptical of the wobble ball, and you'd have a different relationship with this because you would have had to face Stuart Clark in the nets probably when he was bowling it all the time. So you probably have a different relationship. So, it's a slightly different kind of batting than it is facing traditional outswing or even traditional seam bowling, because a lot of the wobble ball is going dead straight. Bowlers are bowling it a little bit fuller, keeping the top of off stump in play rather than bowling outside the channel. Are you working with batters slightly differently, in how to cover that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a fact of trying to play the ball late. Like, I think that's the big thing is to really wait for the ball, play the ball late, and make sure that you're not pushing out at the ball. And I said like a lot of the batters at the moment push at the ball when they're defending. They don't let the ball come to them as much. Whether that's a product of trying to hit the ball harder, 2020 cricket, I'm not sure. It's a hard one, but there's definitely less of that letting the ball come to them with those soft hands and playing the ball late. And I think that's the key to being able to play that seaming ball is to really wait for that ball to come to you and play right under your eyes. And then if you do nick it, ball goes down rather than going to hand.
One of the other things you talked about was in Shield cricket, you talked about the result pitches. And I think that's been going on for a few years now, maybe since, I don't know, even towards the end of your career. I think Shield teams were starting to get a little bit more thinking about, well, we need to get some results here and everything. But the difference is now that the test pitches are also different, right? So we get, you get a stadium like Perth Stadium, and I know it's only new, but it's really a result pitch, whereas we had days where the whacker could be very flat until it cracked open, right? So it's a very different kind of pitch than the whacker was. But the one that you mentioned in the cricket.com piece, which I found interesting, is Adelaide Oval, because it is no longer the Adelaide Oval of 10 or 15 years ago. It really is a very different kind of surface now. It's no longer a batting paradise at all, is it?
No, it dibbles around a fair bit. They leave a bit of grass on it because they didn't want a flat boring draw on a drop-in wicket. So both Adelaide and Melbourne have tried to design their wickets to be able to get wickets on it. Melbourne's got a bit more carry, pace in the wicket, and it moves around. And Adelaide Oval nibbles around. Whereas in the past it was an absolute batting paradise, and then you get these big whopping foot marks, and the ball would spin out of the foot marks if you were good enough to land it in there, and you get some variable bounce on that last day. Now you get very, very, very infrequent variable bounce, but you do get that nibble and that movement off the seam, and quite a lot of the games that have been played at Adelaide are pink ball games too. So you get that the lights phenomenon as well, where the lights come on and everybody starts getting out, and that's just the day-night Test cricket. The Gabba's always had good pace and carry in it, and it's always been a wicket that has been reasonably bowler friendly, and then goes pretty flat when the ball loses its hardness and the seam goes, and then the new ball comes back out and things start happening again. So the Gabba is probably one that's kept its the nuances of it. Sydney these days it doesn't break up like it used to, and I think a lot of that's to do with the amount of games that they actually play on it. They don't play very many games at all. They used to play quite a lot of Shield cricket on it and other games on it as well that would make the square wear, and then the ball would land on the square as it's getting hit. Get that abrasive nature of the bulleye soil that is in the SCG, and the ball would scuff up and go reverse, and that would be a factor. And then obviously the footmarks and the deterioration of the pitch would make it spin. But these days they're leaving a lot more grass on it. It's starting a lot more spicy up front, even in Test cricket. And then we're not seeing that breaking up and that deterioration of the wicket that we normally would have seen in the mid to early 2000s and before that.
It's
a bit sad that you're losing those spinning wickets. Bell Reeve Oval was always really flat. They're trying to make it so you can actually get some wickets on it now, and it's quite a spicy wicket in Shield cricket as well. So there's a lot of these seaming wickets that are coming into play.
If it makes you feel better, I think you average 42 in Bell Reeve and 48 in Melbourne. I think everyone would be happy with those numbers these days. But you never made any runs in Adelaide. I did check that out. You struggled at Adelaide Oval.
I don't know why, because it was an absolute road. I just kept missing out on roads.
The perfect storm thing you said at the start, I think is really interesting because some of this was a natural kookaburra, and the pitches are a natural reaction to the fact that drop-in pitches were quite boring for a little while there, and they weren't particularly entertaining to watch cricket on. And the kookaburra was getting derided around the world for not doing as much as the SG ball did and the Jaques ball did, and just not being as solid a ball as much as anything. It was going soft quite a bit. So we see these little changes, but as you say, like Bell Reeve Oval, when I was growing up, it was just the top three making thousands of runs every game, and Adelaide was exactly the same, right? And now we're not seeing the same things. The spin is going away. All the pitches are very one-dimensional towards these grass. But because you're a coach specifically, the other thing I was interested in, you mentioned it at the top, is you're coaching younger players coming through. At what stage did you start to see the younger players coming through and realize that T20 cricket is changing their priorities or their thought processes and everything else? Like, we're not seeing, that generation of Chris Rogers isn't really coming through anymore. Guys who are like red ball specialists, even players like Renshaw now have to make runs in white ball cricket. When did you start to notice it, and how do you start to handle it as a coach?
Oh, well, obviously in T20 cricket, there's a lot of money to be had, right? But so there's that carrot for players wanting to develop that aspect of the game. But also a lot of the junior format cricket now is white ball cricket, 30 over cricket, less than 30 over cricket. In the really young kids, they're getting 20, 21 balls. They're not getting that opportunity to actually build an innings and learn how to do that if they're good enough. They're getting 21 balls until the age of 12 to be able to actually, to be able to bat and learn their craft. And then when they're getting into under 14, under 16 cricket in local cricket, it's all 30 over cricket. There might be 4 games of 50 over cricket all year. And you get into the pathway cricket, even the under 17s, under 19s cricket is all 50 over cricket. There's no longer form cricket. So where are the kids learning how to play longer form cricket? They're learning in grade cricket if they're given that opportunity to play it. And, that's not till they're 17, 18 years old. And, they're expected to go out in a test match like a Sam Constas potentially, and he's played maybe half a dozen, 100, like 20 games of 2-day cricket, not very many. So, it makes it tricky for them to actually learn their craft as well with the formats they're playing, as well as obviously that priority of wanting to, get picked up by a franchise like the IPL and change their lives. So there's a few factors I think that is changing that longer form focus away from young kids coming through. I think kids still dream of wearing the baggy green, particularly in Australia. They still want to play long form cricket, but they they want to do it in a way that's an attacking brand, and it's not going to affect their franchise capabilities as well.
And that is why Nasser Hussain decided to bowl first at the Gabba. And this all, of course, reminds me of Hit Wicket, which is a mobile cricket strategy game that is all about making those tough decisions. Who do you want to send in as an opener when the asking rate is climbing? Do you go for the big hitter or the steady accumulator? Me, I like to throw in someone a little bit unorthodox. A bit of a wild card like the general. That keeps the opposition guessing. And what about the bowling attack? Do you unleash your express pace early or hold back for the death overs? I'm always tempted to bring on a mystery spinner in the middle overs and just try and break a partnership. Hit Wicket puts you in the captain's chair. You draft the squad and select the batting order and even decide when to use those game-changing abilities. Do you burn your 2x ability to chase down a big total or save it for a critical moment later on? It's strategic, it's addictive, and it's more nerve-wracking than facing a show-up actor bouncer. Give it a go. Download Hit Wicket and see if you've got the tactical nous to win.
It's interesting. I did a podcast with a guy about 2 or 3 years ago, and he pointed out that it was the first time in history that ODI batting averages were higher than Test averages in the whole history of the sport. That had never happened before. And he was wondering if now that because limited overs batting and T20 batting and all those sorts of things have got to such a high level, because as you said, the amount of practice kids do, but also that's where the money is and everything else, whether it made sense to attack more. And within about 6 months of him coming up with this point, Bazball sort of comes on the back of it. Then we see Travis Head and Jaiswal and, you know, people like Glenn Phillips playing Test cricket and Tristan Stubbs. There does seem to be in the last 2 to 3 years a natural evolution where those players who maybe don't trust their defensive games as much are just like, okay, so it's tough now. If I can hit 2 sixes here, this team's going to have to completely change their style. They're going to have to, change the field, maybe, bring a new bowler on or anything else. Whereas before, that previous generation would have been like, okay, if we can grit out, maybe six overs here, that bowler's just going to be taken off naturally. So the mindsets seem to have changed pretty drastically within the space of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree more with that. And that, I've certainly seen that at a domestic level as well. And I think, some players have had success doing it, and there is sometimes a time for that. There's no question where you can put your foot down and try and get rid of a few catches behind the wicket by taking the game on and getting a few sweepers out and making it a little bit easier for you. But you're also taking that risk, and you can find yourself 5 or 6 for 20, which is not going to win too many 4-day games either. So, so there's finding that balance of being able to play both ways, I think, and understanding the surface that you're playing on, the bowler you're playing against, how that matchup lines up for you, and that risk versus reward.
Yeah, you do see a lot of very low first class and even test scores. Like obviously India got bowled out for 46 and Sri Lanka collapsed recently. But you look at the Shield cricket and some of the other domestic cricket around the world, there's some incredibly low scores, and you watch the highlights. It's not as if everyone's coming out swinging, but I think you said at the top, there's a lot of playing on the up and a lot of trying to force themselves onto teams. And also with the short ball, there aren't many players now who take the short ball on the body or defend it. It's like if you get a couple of short balls in a row, chances are you're going to pull a hook now. And that's very different to, again, how it was looked at traditionally.
Yeah, where you duck for half an hour just to, and the bowler would just get sick of it because he's sick of it hurting so much, and that was kind of the mentality at times, when you come up against a fast bowler that was pretty accurate with his bowling, you get it to the top of your head or, get it through a little bit faster. It's understanding, I guess, what you can and can't do. And, these days the young players are supremely confident in being able to take that on. Sometime with their detriment, sometime, to their advantage.
Just looking at your record, because I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, you went on to play Test cricket, and probably was your back that went, wasn't it? After in Test cricket,
I had 3 back surgeries.
Yeah. So you averaged 47 over 11 Tests, and we never get to see the best of you. But I was looking through your domestic record, and it's quite interesting. And this is a pattern that we used to see with a lot of Australian cricketers. I remember Dave Hussey had a very similar pattern. You averaged 39 for New South Wales. But when you get to county cricket, for Notts, you average basically 50. For Worcester, you average basically 50. Yorkshire, I think it's a little bit lower, but it's still over 40 again. there was a pattern in the old days of Australian cricketers would sort of survive Shield cricket. I remember, I think it might have been Dave Hussey or Damien Wright. One of them was telling me that, that it's like a test match when you play Shield cricket. And when you went over and played county, it was more like a circuit because there was so much cricket being played. And so it found it easier to score more runs. And so your overall first class average goes up. We're not really seeing as many Australian batters go over and cash in county cricket the way that they used to. And also, county cricket is a bit harder these days because the balls are moving around. I think the Jaques balls are even more juiced up than the kookaburra balls. So everything's going on. So did you see that as a finishing school, or did you see that as, maybe it suited your game a little bit more, or was it just easier when you were playing in county cricket than it was in Shield cricket?
I wouldn't say it was easier. I think, the Duke ball was always tricky, and the conditions in the UK were tough, particularly early season. They were hard work. But, I think the standard of Shield cricket was really, really strong in that era. It was like a test match. It was probably as hard, if not harder at times, some of the attacks that you're running in against. Whereas county cricket had 18 teams, I think, more than 19 counties. So there was a lot more teams, a little bit less depth. But like the Duke ball and the conditions and the cold weather and the overhead conditions, it sort of evened things out a little bit. But then when you got to June, July, the wickets were pretty good. And, the bowlers started getting a bit more tired because there was a lot more games on. You're getting that week in, week out batting where you don't potentially get that in Shield cricket. There's only 10 games a year in Shield cricket, so you're batting every 2-3 weeks. You get the odd grade game in between that to sort of keep you up and running. But, that consistent nature of playing a lot of cricket, you get into a real nice rhythm in county cricket. And I found it really suited the way I played. And, I enjoyed playing over there as well. And there are quite a lot of Australian players still going over to the UK and playing, especially the top batters. But with the franchise cricket, there's a lot more. There's a bit more mix. It used to be if you were going away, you go to England. Now it's like you're going away, you might go to the Caribbean, you might go to the American T20 league, or you might go to some other T20 league around the place, or you might just go to England and play the 100 or play the Blast. So there's a lot more cricket to be played around the world in different formats rather than just going to play county cricket, 4-day cricket. We had 4-day cricket, 1-day cricket, and some T20 games mixed in amongst it. When I played, it was there was pretty much that, and that was about it. Now there's a lot more to choose from, I guess, for players to go and play. So that first class record doesn't get bumped up, I guess, as much, and also they're not getting that as much practice and as much development either, which a lot of the batters in Australia, all the good players back in the day, there were two overseas players per team.
Yeah.
Pretty much every top batter went and played county cricket. So they're getting double the experience that the players that are just playing in Australia are getting, where you're only getting 10 a year, you're getting 28 games a year. I ended up playing 200 first-class games, and I didn't play 20 seasons. That is to say.
I think you played a lot. I think you might have played, you played more in county cricket than you did in Shield cricket, despite, your Shield record. So it does tell you how different it was. The other interesting thing there is you talk about the June and July wickets when it gets flatter and you get a chance to just go make a lot of runs. So a couple of years ago, New Zealand basically decided that producing green tops in Plunket Shield didn't make any sense, right? Because their players all grew up on green wickets anyway, naturally. And what the bigger issue was that no one was making a lot of runs in domestic cricket. Their bowlers were used to nipping it around everywhere, and their spinners weren't coming on. So they made a conscious effort to make their pitches at home in the Plunket as flat as possible to help faster bowlers, spinners, and to give their batters more confidence for longer innings. That is traditionally, if you look at Sheffield Shield and you look at the old numbers, as I was saying before, that's what Sheffield Shield wickets were a lot more like those sorts of pitches. Is that a part of it? If you're not getting the confidence of long innings as a batter, does it play a part when you get, if you're going out there and you have to face, the best bowlers in the world and you're not averaging 45, 50, these big marks when you come in, if you're averaging 37, 38, are you still maybe questioning your batting a little bit more? Or do those things not play? Is that not as important?
Oh no, I think making runs is definitely a habit, and I think you want to be making big hundreds and learning how to do that, and learning what your best method is to make those hundreds. And yeah, if you're not getting those big hundreds somewhere, there's always going to be that little bit of doubt that you can actually do that at the next level as well. On the flip side as well, I think it affects the way bowlers approach bowling on flat wickets. When they actually get on a flat wicket, they don't know what they're doing, because they've been used to just popping it up there, wobbling the seam around, and the ball moving around and taking wickets easy. And then when it gets flat, it's like, I don't have a method. I don't know how to. I'm going to get guys out. And in the past it was, all right, okay, we're going to try and get the ball to reverse, so we're going to go cross seam for an hour to make the ball reverse swing. And just try and land the ball on the side, shine it up, and get it going reversing. Or it might be that we're going to hang it wide outside off stump and ball them out for a little while, with some catches in some weirder positions. And now it's like, if it's not pitch it up and nip it around, it's bowling bounces every other ball.
Yeah,
because it's the only method that they've got, rather than trying to actually, all right, hang in there, let's whiz some bounce throws onto the square. Let's go cross seam for a little while and try and make that ball reverse swing. But now there's just that imagination's just not there either in the bowling lineups. Not just the batters that aren't used to making big scores. I think that imagination's gone from trying to make something happen out there on some pretty flat wickets. And part of that's to do with the kookaburra ball not deteriorating as well. Part of it's to do with umpires being a little bit more stringent on bounce throws and throwing the ball in making it bounce. Like, you do it once, even if you do it accidentally, you get told off these days. Whereas in the past, if you were smart about it, you could do those things and make that happen, and then the ball would start to go. But yeah, it's just a different beast now, I think.
It is incredible. I started saying that, like, England had a rotation policy of wobble ball for 40 minutes, and then it would be spin for 20 minutes, and then bounces for 25 minutes. And then when that finished, they would just start again. They would go back through the rotation, hope that the ball wobbles again. Okay, it has it. We'll brought the spinner on. Okay, that hasn't worked. We'll go to bounces. So, no, I think you're right. And that's why I think the New Zealand option, what New Zealand did, whether they were copying the old Australian method or not, kind of makes the most sense, because you want your bowlers to be as crafty as possible and as adventurous as possible, as you said, which I think makes a lot of sense. And then you also want your batters to be in that habit of making runs. You see players, someone like Zach Crawley, who's obviously got a lot of natural gifts when it comes to batting. He's got some flaws as well, but he's got a lot of natural gifts. But he's never been a consistent run scorer in his career. And because of that, you can see that there's like a missing part. Anyway, I won't keep you any longer. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast and talking about batting with me, mate.
No worries at all, mate. Anytime. Pleasure.